Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky, a stunner in Oklahoma City in Game 1, plus Chris Paul to Los Angeles again. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcast, this one's always going to be free and never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where over 35,000 subscribers are all hanging out and asking themselves the question of whether or not there's going to be an upset in the NBA Finals. They're asking themselves the question of whether or not Chris Paul is really going to be a Laker finally this time. And whether that would be a good idea. So we'll get to all of those things over the course of the program. Do want to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, Andy, new customers, they can get $200 in bonus bets when their first $5 bet wins. So, how about that? Let's start with Game 1, because I was told by many, many people that this was a trash series, not worth my time. And apparently it is, because Indiana, with a stunning fourth quarter comeback, they win on a Tyrese Halliburton jumper with 0.3 of a second left. And it is a 1-0 advantage for the visitors.
The Pacers led this entire game for 0.3 of a second. That shot that Tyrese Halliburton hit, like the latest in what is just becoming an absolutely legendary playoff run for Tyrese Halliburton, 0.3 of a second. That's the only point in this game that the Pacers led. They were behind for the rest of the game. Some of the stats I've been seeing thrown out on Twitter from Micah Adams: Tyrese Halliburton is the only player with 3 go-ahead shots in the final 5 seconds of a single postseason. He has more of those in the 2025 postseason than Kobe Bryant had in his entire career since the play-by-play era began in 1996. LeBron is the only player with more, I guess, period, than Halliburton. From Karthika Uthayakumar, my apologies if I butchered that. I don't know well enough to know that I did. In all honesty, I think
you can probably guess that at the very least it wasn't letter perfect.
I don't know. It may have actually been letter perfect.
You think she pronounces it? You think that they pronounce it with that total lack of confidence? Is that part of the?
I don't know. She may have had difficulty with this her whole life. I have no idea. But Tyrese Halliburton is 6'4", nearly 86% when taking a shot to tie or lead in the final 90 seconds of the fourth or overtime in this playoffs. That's the most such shots in a single postseason since 1997. NBA teams were 0-121 when down by 7 or more points in the final 3 minutes of regulation in the NBA Finals in the last 28 postseasons. They are now 1-221 from NBA Communications. Game 1 was the Pacers' 5th comeback victory from a deficit of 15 or more points in the 2025 NBA playoffs, the most by a team in a single postseason since 1998. And then from Nate Duncan, the Pacers are the first NBA team to win a finals game. This is actually really interesting, with 0 20-point scorers since the 2013 Heat. Like, we're seeing stuff happening in these playoffs, specifically involving the Pacers, that, no exaggeration, we have not seen before.
What was it? 1-221 or something like that?
It is now 1-121 for teams down by 7 or more points in the final 3 minutes of regulation in the NBA Finals over the last 28 postseasons. They are now 1-121. To quote Han Solo, never tell me the odds.
Tell me the odds. That's right. Look, I mean, and I don't think, you can't, at least I go back and watch again. Like, I wasn't sitting there watching this going, like, OKC is just, throwing up here. It's like, They didn't seem to particularly lose composure. They, they obviously weren't perfect. You lost a lead. The defensive integrity didn't quite hold as it had before. They couldn't quite force turnovers in the same way. They missed shots they needed to make, whatever. But it's not like they were just throwing the ball all over the gym in like some sort of obvious choke job. Like,
no, in the first half, the Pacers were the one.
Oh, no, they were.
Which was incredibly out of character for the Pacers. They do an exceptional job taking care of the ball. They had 19 turnovers in the first half. Like that should alone just bury a team. Like you should be done when
right. But Indiana's defense, and I think, you start looking at like how teams can win and what you can do. Like Indiana's defense, the volume of shots that OKC was able to get over Indiana over the course of especially in the first half was insane. But the game didn't get out of hand because the Pacers actually did a pretty good job defensively keeping them from actually scoring. It was really only when the Thunder were able to, force turnovers sort of in the open floor and keep going that they had some luck there. And Shea, obviously in the third quarter, fourth quarter, really started to cook. I was just really impressed with what Indiana did because I'm watching this and it gets down to, 8. OKC hits a clutch shot. It's back up to 11. It's 6. A few minutes left. It's 6, but then Oklahoma City responds with like a bucket they need. All of a sudden, it's 3, and then it's 1, and now it doesn't look much different, but they're not pushing that lead back up. And I think it looked to me at least like Casey Wallace and Alex Caruso had at least a potentially some sort of little miscommunication, or we're not on the same page on that last shot from Halliburton, where it looked like. Wallace, to me, it looked like he thought Caruso was going to come take that, kind of as they were dribbling there, come up and guard him. But whatever. I mean, Halliburton then pulls up and hits an incredibly good shot. I think Oklahoma City is going to win this series, Andy, but Indiana has lost, I believe, 4 games now in 3 full series plus 1 game. It's possible at this point that we just are sort of collectively underestimating them. I don't think Oklahoma City is overrated, but Indiana still could be underrated.
It's certainly possible. I mean, they were a 6 seed, but basically from when the calendar turned to 2025, the Pacers have been a really good team all season. And, they have played better than their record. And I know it becomes really easy to be dismissive of a 6 seed in the East, especially because the East has been so top heavy throughout the season. Like particularly, when Boston was at full strength, it really felt like it was Boston's conference, and if not Boston's, Cleveland's conference to lose, and nobody else really had a realistic chance. But if you look at how the East was shaking out over the last few months of the season, they were playing really well, Indiana. It also, too, coincides with Tyrese Halliburton having now the second season in a row, slow start to the year and dealing with injuries to start the year. And they're just a much, much obviously different team when Tyrese Halliburton is playing like himself. And, we're going to talk about, or at least I want to at least get into a little bit, the depth of the Pacers as something that the Lakers really can look at that the Lakers can look at and recognize the importance of depth, particularly in a postseason where they didn't have, if nothing else, enough depth that JJ Redick would trust. But despite the depth of this Pacers team, they really do go as Halliburton goes. And until he's really running on all cylinders, the rest of the team can only be so good. But when he is going and playing the way he should, this team is really, really good.
There's one other thing that I think sticks out when you watch, OKC throughout most of the playoffs, when you watch Indiana, obviously, in the game on Thursday night, that really sticks out to me in terms of something that separates them from the Lakers. We'll get to that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. You're damn right they are. And every night brings highlight-worthy performances. Oh, yeah. Major momentum shifts again and can't miss moments. It's like this copy was written right after this game. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, really at this point on the nose, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart, win big. You can track the players who consistently show up in the biggest moments. Their names rhyme with Schmaliburton. And also when they put on their superhero capes, and those trends can help inform your next bet. Maybe take that knowledge. You can roll it into the same game parlay, press things up, keep it exciting. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
All right. So you wanted to talk about the depth thing when you're thinking about game one, but we'll get to the Chris Paul item because this is the rare, Andy, the rare. Where are we? Early June free agent kind of rumor that actually seems like has some logic to it. So we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, thinking about the depth of this Pacers team and the Thunder as well, but just specifically with the Pacers, just because they won this game and they've been considered the underdog, I think this game really demonstrates the importance of depth and the way I think that is starting to become more of a trend in these playoffs. We talked about this before, but also the importance of two-way depth. And I think in a lot of ways, the importance of two-way depth that can maybe even take a greater importance than one-way talent, where you've got a one-way player who maybe is better at his one-way skill than a different two-way player, what he does on either side of the ball. Like, we'll take Rui as an example. I'm not even thinking of him specifically, but Rui is, I think he's made some strides defensively, but he's still at this point of his career a one-way player. He's an offensive player, and you can start seeing the importance of having a lot of two-way players, even some of these players that may not be as good offensively or defensively as Rui is a scorer, but if they are solid on both sides of the ball, it just creates so much optionality for your coaches. It offers so many fewer weaknesses when you're on the court, so many fewer spots to attack. You're just seeing the importance of this in these playoffs.
Well, you get,
and those guys don't have to be star players, by the way. They don't have to be necessarily the most expensive players. Like high-end two players do cost a lot, but if you can find ways to get them, there are some players on this Pacers team and the Thunder team that are not super expensive.
No, and obviously, the Thunder, half the reason the Thunder guys are also inexpensive is because most of them are young. And you get a lot of that on Indiana as well. And then, you have guys like Nesmith, who's sort of a castaway from Boston. They had, no spare parts. He's one of them. A guy like Obi Toppin was no longer desired in New York, and Indiana figured out a way to kind of turn him into something that I think that quite frankly the Knicks wish they had. That's what the Knicks were hoping for. And so, they've and I think it's a question of depth. It's two-way depth. It's the versatility that provides. It means not so much that you're playing 15 guys a night or 12 guys a night. Both of these teams played 8 guys big minutes, 15 minutes or more, and a couple more guys, were under 10 minutes. And that's a deeper rotation than a lot of teams play in the playoffs. But to me, it's not so much just, can you reasonably put 8 or 9, 10 guys on the floor? Because if you can, that allows your best players to be sharper, fresher, and all that stuff down the stretch of a game. But it's also, can you mix and match effectively? Can you take the 8th guy and make him the 6th guy one night, the 9th guy, the 7th guy, and all these things, and sort of mix and match your bench and your parts in a way that give your roster the most amount of versatility. And so that I totally agree with.
It's depth of options.
Yes.
As much as anything else.
I think, if you haven't listened to it, go back and we did a show kind of about that idea of like the Lakers in this offseason can build depth. They can build, more talent. They can increase the level of talent at the top of their roster. It's going to be very difficult to do both. And so which one do they pick, which avenue and all that? The thing that sticks out to me is the Lakers going back since really the Denver series in the Western Conference Finals. Since that time, have had a what I call last mile problem, where they do a good job through 3 3/4 of a game and they just aren't able to bring it home. And I think what sticks out most about Indiana, because again, I don't think Oklahoma City really did anything wrong. I don't think OKC, crapped the bed or anything like it. Wasn't. I don't think,
No, I mean, they needed more from Jay Will. They needed more from Chet Holmgren. I think there's a chance, at least in retrospect, that maybe Mark Dagnall should have just stuck with his normal starting lineup as opposed to going with Cason Wallace.
Sure.
Switching out what was working.
Yeah, no, I all of those things. I'm not saying that they did everything perfectly. I'm saying that you can tell when a team tightens up and gacks away a game. Like they just, you're bouncing the ball off your foot. You're taking terrible shots. You're making, suddenly, pick and rolls that have been covered all game are like wide open and you're not going to, none of that happened. Like Indiana's late game execution, the reason they're able to make all these absurd comebacks all the time is because their late game playoff execution has been unbelievable in these playoffs. And the Lakers go back to the last mile problem in the Western Conference Finals against Denver the following season. They play Denver again and they're in all these games and Denver closes and the Lakers can't. This year, the Lakers was it game 3 they were up by 11, or game 4 they were up by 11? Yeah.
Are you talking about the one where JJ went with the second half?
I think
that's
so.
Game 4.
Were they up in game 3 as well?
I'd have to take a look off the top of my head. I don't remember.
They have had a terrible time closing games, and they had a bad time with it in the playoffs this year with JJ Redick. They had a bad time with it last year with Darvin Ham. They've had trouble with it with a roster that had Luka. They had trouble with a roster that was an AD and LeBron thing. With D'Angelo Russell, they have not been a good last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter playoff team. And I don't know the exact recipe for that. It helps to have a point guard who never turns the ball over. And Tyrese Halliburton is incredibly good at not turning the ball over. But if you want to look at something, and I guess Lakers fans could be mad, pointing it out, you're not offering prescriptions. But if you want to have an example of something that separates the Lakers from the teams that have been better than them, the teams that they have to compete against and chase and catch, that's the level of execution that they need in the fourth quarters. And they're not getting it.
Well, I think one of the things that separates both the Thunder, particularly during the first half when they were really getting Indiana out of sorts offensively, their defense in the first half of this game was so incredibly disruptive. Like I said, Indiana had 19 turnovers in the first half. They averaged, I think, about 11 or 12 per game. Their main ball handlers, Halliburton, Andrew Nebhart, TJ McConnell, they never turn the ball over. So this was incredibly out of character for Indiana. OKC always has that defense that they can fall back on as the thing that we can do
Mhm.
to get ourselves back to zero again, like to reset our levels when things aren't going well, or if we need to choke out an opponent. Either way, this is what we can do. This is who we are. And, the Pacers very clearly have an identity down the stretch, and they know exactly how they are going to play. And they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and they have a belief in it. And that belief extends beyond just Tyrese Halliburton's self-belief. Like, his self-belief can only get the team so far, coming back from double-digit deficits, if the rest of the team isn't on board and they don't equally believe. Like, that team knows exactly who they are offensively, I think, on a bunch of different facets. The Lakers, the last few years, have not seemed like they've really had an identity in terms of, like, if you asked us, how exactly do the Lakers play? There have been different points over the course of the season where we could describe it, but it's never felt that way, like, consistently for a
Mhm.
couple seasons. Like, ever since the 2020 championship run, where it was very clear the identity they had, defense first, and like a really enveloping, physically overwhelming defense. It's never felt like they've really had an identity, and it hasn't felt like Rob Pelinka has really attempted to put rosters together with the idea of a very specific identity. So
Well,
that to me,
they've made radical changes, and then radical changes that have been required by the radical changes,
yeah,
and then they had a radical change that everybody likes, but they had a radical change kind of thrust upon them or gifted to them by Nico Harrison in the form of Luka Doncic. So yeah, there just hasn't been any continuity at all, and that is problematic. Andy, you and I remember when Chris Paul was a Laker.
mhm,
We were there. We
yeah,
wrote stories about it.
yeah,
Stories that never saw the light of day.
yeah. They got
We were ready to
spiked.
do radio shows. It never happened.
Mhm.
But so we were there the first time Chris Paul became a Laker. Are we going to be here the second time he becomes a Laker? That's next. Chris Paul had a surprisingly good year, I think, at least in the minds of some people in San Antonio. He's not all-star Chris Paul anymore, but was a very solid contributor on that team this year, and and perhaps most impressively, played every game.
Yeah,
At age 800. I mean,
28 minutes a game, 82 games.
yeah, he wasn't just hanging out, no disrespect, Markieff Morris style. Like, you can play hurt when you're not going to be asked to play. You're there for all of them. And so, CP, he was under 10 points a game, but he averaged 7.5 assists. He averaged over a steal a game. He shot 38% from 3-point range. The numbers aren't peak Chris Paul, but they're not bad either, especially on a per minute basis. Our friend Arash Markazi at the Sporting Tribune, the site that he launched, noted that Chris Paul said that he wants to, his family is in LA, and he wants to finish in LA because he doesn't want to be away from his family anymore. That leaves two options, Andy. You got the Clippers and the Lakers. The Lakers, I have a theory on this as to whether or not, like, Chris Paul would be a good addition. I'm curious though, first, what you think.
Well, like you said, there are dots that feel like they can be connected. Chris Paul, his family lives in LA. He is a free agent. The Lakers could use a better backup floor general than Gabe Vincent, independent of Chris Paul. Chris Paul is very good friends with LeBron. Chris Paul is the one member of the Banana Boat crew that LeBron's never played with in the NBA. So, there is still a loop to complete. Like you mentioned, his numbers, a little under 9 points a game, about 7.5 assists, little under 38% from behind the arc, 28 minutes. Those numbers may not blow you away, but they're better than Gabe Vincent's. Like, Gabe played 72 games, so less than 82, 6 fewer minutes per game, 6 points per game on 40-35 splits, and his playmaking is nowhere close to Chris Paul's. Like, Chris Paul averaged nearly triple the assists than Gabe's assists per 36 minutes. Like, Gabe is really a shooting guard in a point guard's body. And the problem is also, though, he's not often aggressive enough looking to score like a shooting guard would either. And he's often not as effective as you'd want him to be in those moments when he is aggressive. I've been thinking about this, and I don't know so much that I want Chris Paul specifically, but the fact that if you asked me who would I rather have, Chris Paul or Gabe Vincent, I'm leaning Chris Paul. If nothing else speaks to the upgrades that need to be there for the bench with both scoring and playmaking, that I think Chris Paul or pick a different backup point guard would help more than Gabe Vincent. Like, in a lot of ways, my thoughts on Chris Paul could be, I guess, construed as more about Gabe than Chris Paul specifically.
Gabe's better defender.
I'm not even, you know what, though?
I think so.
Here's the thing.
At this stage of CP's career, I think so.
He might be, but the problem even there, I mean, I'll be honest, I would need to go look at Chris in San Antonio to like really know for sure, what he's like as a defender. But even if Gabe is a better defender than Chris Paul at this stage of his career, Chris in his prime was an elite defender, but he's 40. You still run into the same problem with both of them in the sense that Gabe often gets targeted because of his size.
Mm-hmm.
And while sometimes he can be effective for a guy his size, he often gets targeted specifically because he's small. Like, part of the reason I got so frustrated in the first few months of last season was with all the automatic, no questions asked, exceptionally accommodating switching that the Lakers were doing defensively, and the fact that JJ was often using Gabe as a defensive substitute. His defensive substitute was typically getting targeted by the other team. Like, that's a problem. You can't have a guy out there who's supposed to be one of your better defenders and offenses are actually looking to try to get him into a switch. So even if you think Gabe is a better defender than Chris, you run into a lot of the same problems with both of them defensively regardless.
I think there's some truth to that. I'll tell you where I think, whether you're keeping Vincent, whether you're getting a different guard, and because you've used trade Vincent in a trade. Carl for President Anthony points out, CP got a little traffic cone swag. He didn't even close the fourth quarter in San Antonio. Again, I don't think he wouldn't close fourth quarters here either.
No,
he's a backup, and
right.
So you don't expect your backups.
He should make it clear he should not be starting for the Lakers. If he no.
So I mean, I don't have I think he played pretty well last year. I think he could actually help the Lakers. I don't know how much he'd play, but I think he could help the Lakers. I don't think he'd need to play 28 minutes for this team. Where I get a little concerned, and this is less a Chris Paul question than it is a Rob Pelinka roster construction question, because the danger with, especially when you don't have a lot of things to choose from, we're talking about like Chris Paul probably at the minimum. We're not.
There's no probably.
But you're not. You could use part of your exception or something like that.
I would not want to.
Right.
The options would need to be exceptionally low,
right,
for me to want to break up part of that exception for Chris Paul. It's a league minimum or no thanks.
And so, excuse me. And so you have a situation where you can kind of gather, like, it's the problem with having to do a lot of stuff too with veterans minimum guys. You don't have a lot of choices, so you end up sort of gathering the best player that you can find, and you don't focus to whatever ability you have to making all the parts work together, to filling out The Lakers need to get more athletic. Chris Paul does not make you more athletic. They need to be able to defend better, particularly on the perimeter. And CP is probably one of the best, defenders in the league from a perimeter standpoint at age 40. Among the 40-year-olds, he's probably as good as anybody.
He out defends Garrett Temple.
He's only 38. 40. Garrett Temple's 38, I think.
I know. I'm rounding up. He's almost.
It's a different age group.
True.
So it's not that he's terrible, but there's only so much you can expect from the guy. And so is he somebody who kind of addresses, okay, well, if you don't do it there, you need to get somewhere else. But then you kind of, the best small forward available here right now, the best power forward, or the best center. It's like, this guy doesn't really do what we like, all the things we need, but he's appreciably better than this other guy that we could sign that, it becomes, you only have space for a couple of those guys probably that are like, all right, he doesn't really solve a one of our problems, but he's just a good player. So let's have him.
Richard Arcala comments, are we shooting for a championship, or are we a developmental / mentoring team in a retirement home?
Yeah. And I don't think it's fair to put CP in that. Like, he's going to be better than some of the minimum options that are out there. And people will be like, different positions, obviously. Lonnie Walker is out there. Like, why is he like Chris Paul's still a better player than Lonnie Walker?
Yeah.
28 minutes a game last year, Chris Paul averaged 7.5 assists. He routinely had games where he was up around 10. He still knows how to move the thing around. And in a second unit, you have LeBron, you have AR, presumably you have Luka. And so but like, in a second unit, as a guy who can both stand there and shoot threes, still at a pretty reasonable rate, and also keep the wheels moving.
Especially if, we've talked about before, the Lakers obviously need to juice their bench, scoring their bench production, like quite literally the counting stats. Mm-hmm. And they're going to try to, I think, in a variety of different ways, whether through trades or the taxpayer mid-level or vet mins, probably look for the most gaudy type of players they can bring, like the most counting stats players. But if they can't fill the bench that way, then at minimum, they need somebody who can help give those, mid-level scorers the best shots possible, like the best looks possible, put them in the best position possible to score. Chris Paul's good at that. He is good at that. You may be frozen. I think Brian is frozen right now. So in any event, leave us comments, your thoughts on Chris Paul, about whether or not you think this is a good idea, whether you would prefer Chris Paul over Gabe Vincent, whether you would want Chris Paul in the first place, other suggestions you would have for guys off the bench, veteran minimums, guys that they could get with taxpayer mid-level, stuff like that. We will be back on Monday. Again, make sure that you are subscribing wherever you get audio for your podcast. Make sure you are watching on YouTube, hitting the subscribe button so you never miss a show. We will see everyone on Monday.